Hi again, everyone. Today we are going to jump into chapter 15 of Tao Te Ching, and as always, I will read 3 different translations and go into some detail about my interpretation of them. Our first translation goes like this. The skillful masters of the Tao in old times, with a subtle and exquisite penetration, comprehended its mysteries, and were deep also so as to elude men's knowledge. As they were thus beyond men's knowledge, I will make an effort to describe of what sort they appeared to be. Shrinking looked they like those who wade through a stream in winter, irresolute like those who are afraid of all around them, grave like a guest in awe of his host, evanescent like ice that is melting away, unpretentious like wood that has not been fashioned into anything, vacant like a valley, and dull like muddy water. Who can make the muddy water clear? Let it be still, and it will gradually become clear. Who can secure the condition of rest? Let movement go on, and the condition of rest will gradually arise. They who preserve this method of the Tao do not wish to be full of themselves. It is through their not being full of themselves that they can afford to seem worn and not appear new and complete. Translation number 2 is as follows. Those of yore who have succeeded in becoming masters are subtle, spiritual, profound, and penetrating. On account of their profundity, they cannot be understood. Because they cannot be understood, therefore I endeavor to make them intelligible. How cautious they are, like men in winter crossing a river. How reluctant, like men fearing in the four corners their neighbors. How reserved, they behave like guests. How elusive, they resemble ice when melting. How simple, they resemble rough wood. How empty, they resemble the valley. How obscure, they resemble troubled waters. Who, by quieting, can gradually render muddy waters clear? Who, by stirring, can gradually quicken the still? He who cherishes this reason is not anxious to be filled. Since he is not filled, therefore he may grow old. Without renewal, he is complete. And our last translation says, in olden times, the ones who were considered worthy to be called masters were subtle, spiritual, profound, wise. Their thoughts could not be easily understood. Since they were hard to understand, I will try to make them clear. They were cautious like men wading a river in winter. They were reluctant like men who feared their neighbors. They were reserved like guests in the presence of their host. They were elusive like ice at the point of melting. They were like unseasoned wood. They were like a valley between high mountains. They were obscure like troubled waters. They were cautious because they were conscious of the deeper meanings of life and its possibilities. We can clarify troubled waters by slowly quieting them. We can bring the unconscious to life by slowly moving them. But he who has the secret of the Tao does not desire for more. Being content, he is able to mature without desire to be newly fashioned. So, as we can see, those ancient masters knew something that we don't. They were in some way connected to an old way of seeing things that has since been lost. Their knowledge is mysterious and beyond our comprehension. And because of this, all we can do now is make clumsy attempts to try and describe these truths. We've adopted a different way of seeing nature and the outside world since the beginnings of Western science. Now, whether or not this has in some sense confused us or changed our consciousness to one of more overthinking, more chaos, and more luxury is obvious. What I see in this chapter isn't a call to action to give up on achievement and to go back to simpler times. It's more subtle than that. We don't have to always battle between light and dark, future and past. So rather than going to any extreme, we can make an attempt to find what was so special about those masters of the past and attempt to integrate into our lives here and now what they may have known. Again, this is a very subtle subject that we're going into. The sage is careful, like one who crosses a stream in winter. Rather than pushing forward at full speed, perhaps we ought to slow things down and tread more lightly. Making waves isn't necessary all of the time, as we can be calm and quiet while going about our business anyways. Rather than provoking others, thus creating jealousy, envy, and rage in our communities and our social circles, we can instead practice modesty. So if we behave as guests, we reduce the risk of stirring up any trouble in our daily happenings. We can channel this idea of being empty and simple by reducing our ever-increasingly ridiculous goals. We don't really want to be rich, famous, powerful, living in luxury and glory. We may think that we do, but we have a myriad of examples of how badly it can go wrong. We can read autobiographies, listen to stories, and see all of the mistakes that those who have come before us have made. We can know for ourselves what this does to a person. And we find ourselves living in a world where celebrity worship is considered normal. Families of reality television stars, so-called musicians, all of those seeking attention and grasping for those fleeting moments of fame and notoriety. At the same time, we're sold on the idea that the purpose of life is to consume products and chase this effervescent trail of happiness and comfort. All of this is unnatural for human beings. All of this promotes the superficial. Look at what I'm doing over here. I bet you wish you were doing it too. See the way I look? I bet you wish you could look like this and feel as amazing as I do. Is any of this helping in any way? I seem to think not. So anyways, we are asked if we can sit in the water while the mud settles. This rings a bell for me about sitting in meditation. Being calm enough to be able to sit in the ocean of your own thought process and gradually allowing silence to take over. One of the most difficult tasks that one could ever imagine going into. To not constantly need to be thinking and doing things like a chicken with its head cut off. We're asked if we can make action into non-action. Exactly. We aren't seeking to fulfill any huge, lofty goals here. We find ourselves content here now in the moment. While we're content in this moment, we discard the ideal of perfection. We see in the first place that it is an ideal. And with this ideal of perfection thrown out the window, we can display our imperfections naturally. This is the main point that I would like to squeeze out of this chapter. The unworked or unseasoned wood that proudly displays itself to the rest of the world, and the vast emptiness in the valley between the high mountains, these are things that we have lost touch with. The things that those old masters were so aware of. And nothing in our modern world even points us in this direction either. And that's what makes this such a difficult and subtle chapter. We have so many gizmos, activities, things to think about, things to do. It isn't even at all obvious to us that there is another way to live this life, and that this way is directly inverse to the normal, everyday reality that we're all sharing in this carnival ride of a world. And finally, again, I would just like to stress that this isn't a call to action to just give up on everything. We still need goals and endeavors. We still need to feel alive and to participate in the world. Nobody is saying to turn your back and to go live in a cave for the rest of your life. On the contrary, we can remind ourselves of these old teachings and head into our lives with a fresh perspective that's more concerned with harmony and simplicity than with power, prestige, and social status.